Now, it is my pleasure to introduce fellow EWL member Claire Becker. Claire knows exactly what it feels like to be disconnected, burned out, and generally over it. And that's exactly what drives her to make sure that you don't have to take on a major change alone. Through a decade of coaching and development experience, Claire has supported more than 100 leaders and professionals across sectors to make transitions in their mindsets, careers, and lifestyles. Today, she is going to help us do the same. Welcome, Claire.
Hey, thank you so much, Cassie, and thank you everybody for being here today to engage in a conversation about rising through change. I would love to just make sure my slides are up there. We are good to go. We're here today to take and apply so much of the wisdom that just came from our conversation of Lindsay and Maggie and take it into action. And I'd love to jump right in because we are here to rise together. Over the next hour of this workshop, I have 3 commitments that I've made to you. First is to give you space, to give yourself permission to release any of the push, pull, weight, or strain of the change that we've experienced over the last year. Second is to offer you a new protocol to handling change that you can process and practice here today to take the lessons so that you can set a new set of change rules so that in all of the change that is certainly still coming our way, you can thrive. Cassie mentioned some of the things that you need, but I want to really underscore that this is where we're going to find our spark for change. I'd love for you to have your workbooks open. They came either in an email or can be downloaded from our platform. Grab your phone to have it handy for some mentee engagement in a little bit, and be ready to show up for each other in this community. We're going to rise together. So let's start from where we are, because I don't need to tell you that it has been a year. At work, you've seen change, like where your desk is physically located, if it is in an office, in a building outside of your home. And more adaptively, we've seen our work streams change, the size of our teams, how we consider supporting our direct reports, and otherwise. Lots of responsibility has come our way. Over the last year, we've seen change at home, whether that means spending time very alone because our social settings have moved, or in a full house with lots of folks and lots of internet connection needs. Over the last year and then some, we have seen in our communities moments of hope and connectedness, and a lot of devastating heartbreak that just shows the journey that our country is still on and will travel to be able to uplift justice and equity and love for all. All of these avenues also impact change for ourselves in what we value, how we orient to ourselves and the world and our families, and that is something to honor. So what have we done with all of this change? Now, it may not feel yet like we've been rising through the change, but we certainly have adapted. And I want us to make sure that we take space to give ourselves credit for that. Now, consciously or unconsciously, humans by nature tend to adapt by creating rules. These are norms that we accept that help us make sense and add structure to the chaos in the ever-changing world we live in. These rules effectively answer the question, what will I do about this change? And they determine our priorities and routines and ways of being. And at the end of the day, fairly or unfairly, these rules often serve as the benchmark for how we judge ourselves and others and how the day went. Now, as a coach, I often pay attention to these rules, especially when they're unconscious and we might not be aware of them. But in the pandemic, it's been even more important to watch them. And I want to give you some examples. Again, with the big umbrella question, what will I do about this change? We saw different questions and rules of answers come up. A lot of people asked, what will I do if I'm stuck at home? And the rule became, if you are home, bake sourdough. This rule existed so prevalently in our social scene that you could no longer buy yeast at Pick and Save. Do you remember that? On a more serious note, the change in the pandemic prompted the question, how do we stay safe? And a rule became really transparent and protected and promoted by the CDC. The answer to any indoor event is no, thank you. Leaders that I know and managers said, well, how will I lead and be effective and good for my teams? And rules popped up like, well, managers don't sign off in a pandemic. Others of us saw changes in income and financial stability and jobs. And so we may have asked, how do I contribute? Well, if it's not finance, maybe it's household chores. And a whole lot more people with work and household and families and care for others and schooling asked, how do I balance it all with this change? And created rules like, well, so-and-so's learning comes first, or their job or their needs. And whether that was conscious or unconscious, it makes me ask, where are you on all of this? These rules answer the question, what will I do with all this change? And oftentimes they just pop right up unquestioned for us. But it's important as we start this workshop to consider where we are in change of the last year and the rules we've been living by so that we can later decide how we want to rise through it. So for the next couple of minutes, let's call it until about 10, I'd love for you to check out your workbook and pages 4 through 6 to engage in a little bit of your own reflection on the last year and the rules that you've been living by, now that I've shared a little bit of my context and example for it. Marit is going to put on the music. We are going to stay right here and give you just a couple of minutes to get centered as we get started today. Thanks. Thank you for taking a moment for getting centered and beginning to pull out some of this reflection. In workshops, we do work. And so taking a moment to consider your journey over the last year and the rules that you've been living by is so important because that is the content that we work with. Now, I am dying to know about these rules. And so in the next part, I want to be able to multiply our individual reflections toward a group synthesis with the, I think, 300 some people who are here today. So let's go ahead and dig into that. First, I'm really curious how many of the rules that you wrote out, either in pre-work or as you recentered today, do you think you were consciously aware of before this exercise? For example, did I realize consciously that there was this rule influencing me about needing to bake sourdough bread? And so I'd love to dig in here with a quick poll. Grab your phone for this and go to menti.com, use the code at the top of the screen to log in and share. Of the rules that you got to, how many of this do you think you were consciously aware of before taking a beat today? All right, proof that Menti works. It seems the early winner is this about 26 to half of the rules we were consciously aware of. Thank you so much for sharing this. I'm going to give us a couple more minutes, but we can see that there are some sneaky rules in our lifestyles. Some of us here are able to say like, yep, more than 75% I'm aware of. Your rules probably look like goals or set routines and habits. But for the rest of us, it can be easy to fall in to these ways of being and operating unconsciously that are guiding what we do. I'm going to take us to the next question. Stay on Menti because we're going to be here for a little bit, and so you can continue to contribute. I know that there are rules of brilliance out there. And we heard one of the ones from Lindsay earlier. She said, okay, I've got a no plans on weekends rule. That serves me. And when I say yes, I make sure it's a two-way street. That serves me. And so I wonder, to just soak up the brilliance of this group too, because it's not all negative, even if there are some surprise rules out there. What is a rule on your list that benefits you as a whole person so that we can celebrate and affirm the ways that we are taking care of ourselves? All right, we're coming in here. Kindness comes first. What an excellent thing. One of my previous managers had a rule that said things don't have feelings. And so they never come first. People have feelings. And that always struck me. Thank you for sharing these rules. And if you see one that inspires you and you want to take, we're in this together. So make sure to notice what is benefiting our community and see if you can add to your own routine. Do favors for your future self. I love that. We've got more and more coming in. No is a full sentence. That is definitely a theme from today. So in these rules, there are ones to anchor to, and that's a lesson to hold on to as we move forward. And we continue to refine our practice. The next question that I have for you is taking a step back. So we've experienced all this change. We adapt to it by adding unconscious or conscious rules to what we're doing. And I'm really curious, when you think about the rules that you've digested here, what % of them are about adding something to your plate that I bet is already full? What % of those rules would you say are about subtracting something for your plate? And it's okay to completely estimate here, but what would you say is the ratio balance? We've got some spikes coming in here. There's not a lot of movement here from that above 50%. Oh. Thank you so much for checking in on these. I see that more of these rules are about adding things to our plate than subtracting from them. I want to hold on to that so that we can follow up in a little bit. What an important reflection point. The last question that I have is really just to serve as a pulse check for our community as we proceed forward into this workshop and toward discussion groups so that we can make sure to keep each other in mind. As you have looked at the journey over the last year and then some, and the rules that you've been living by, now very conscious for you, what feelings come up so that we can hold space for each other? Go ahead and share the first thing that comes to mind. Languishing. That's been all over my feed these days from that New York Times article. Thank you for bringing your whole truth to this and this first feeling that comes to mind so that we can create and hold space for each other. So as folks are still continuing to drop in those feelings, what I'd like to share is for the community who has put authentic and perfection and hope and grace, thank you for shining a light on the possibility that this last year has brought us. I invite you through the rest of our workshop to stay centered in that possibility and share it with others. Give each other the same grace that you give yourself. And if you are one of the people who is feeling overwhelmed, anxiety, or languishing, I invite you especially to consider this next invitation. When you can look at the last year, the change you've experienced, the rules you've developed, I'd like to invite you to consider that you haven't made a mistake. In any given moment, you did the best you could. And that's true for us always. Whether we judge the things that we do as mistakes or as good ideas in the future, right, looking back, because we've seen the rewards and the consequences that come from them, the truth is that in any given moment, you're going to make the most natural and logical decision you could, based on the support you feel around you, the trust in your environment, the resources you have access to, your consciousness and your knowledge. You've done the best you could. And so if there is weight of shoulds and could haves and I didn'ts that are hanging on from that last year's reflection, I ask for you to consider releasing them. You've done the best you could, and that's what we're going to continue to do forward. And with this sentiment of we're going to keep playing here in this workshop, taking on a new protocol and trying it in new ways, we're going to do that in the most natural and logical way we know, and you can't make a mistake. So let's take that energy forward and start at the place, no other than change itself. We've now gone from that permission to release a little bit, and now we'll start with change with a new protocol that can help you process to recenter on your values, plan, and priorities. You know, EWL is such a special community that there were about 150 of us together in January on a Zoom platform, listening to Katie Rasool and her brilliance as she coached us to planning for 2021. Now, if you were there, loved that, and have fallen off track, my goal is to get us back there and continuing to follow Katie's directions because she is amazing, right? So that's that next part, and we're going to make sure leaving here with a personal set of change rules that are going to help you continue to thrive. So let's get into change itself. We've talked a little bit about it, but it's useful to really define and clarify what we're talking about. Change is the modifications we see in the world around us. They're visible or tangible or measurable in some way. Hairstyles change, jobs change, the state of global health changes, living situations change, furniture changes. We see that change around us, and most often, the way that we respond to change, as you saw through our mentee poll, is by adding. We see something change externally and we jump into action. We've got new rules of how to adapt to it, new routines we add in to make sure we're being excellent teachers and parents and professionals. We take on new priorities to keep everything going and generate new ideas of how to cope. But as you also saw in our mentee poll, that response, while very human and no judgment needed for it, can be exhausting, frustrating, burnout ridden. And so this part of our workshop today is to support you in trying on a different response to change one where you won't make a mistake and hopefully is more enjoyable. And that's in looking at an external change that we see and centering on an internal transition. Transitions are about the innermost mental and emotional processes to interpret, react to, and move on in the face of change. And a lot of my work comes inspired by the research of William Bridges, who did countless studies of the way non-Western, especially in non-US cultures, create transitions for themselves, for their communities in a way that is holistic and serves their processing as human beings, not as robots who are trying to do it all. And so while it is just, while it is so normal for us to respond to change by adding a bunch of things to our list, Bridges says that we should actually do the opposite. And his framework says that if you want to experience a holistic transition, you start by processing the ending that's occurring for you. Then you enter into reflection in a neutral space. And finally, you define a beginning. And so this is the process today that we will practice together. First, I will talk a little bit about how I experienced this with the pandemic, and then we're going to jump into breakout rooms so that you can share your own experience and practice trying this order of processing on. So let's jump in first with how to experience an ending. On the screen, you see 3 of my favorite coaching questions to help people and myself dig in and make real and tangible the ends that I've experienced with change. When I consider what I used to have before the pandemic and then what went away somewhere in March 2020, gym memberships, an office at work in a building outside of my home, monthly happy hours, date nights, those ended for me as I knew them. When I consider my time, well, for me, it was a lot more time alone because I was in my house all day, whereas before I would be out in the world and social settings and be able to see people. I know for others, it became a lot less time, a lot less time alone because their house is packed, whereas I became a lot more alone. And there are other endings, right? Not everything has to be heavy. There's less time getting ready or no more commute. And when I considered sincerely what I was most losing that won't be true for me when I look at the pandemic, it was that sense of security and assumption around health for myself and others. I was in that very privileged position where most of my family members were reasonably healthy. I never wondered waking up every day what I was going to hear about them. And that the pandemic's completely changed my perception, right? My mom was testing COVID samples in her lab at Madison, and I've got grandparents who just cannot follow a single instruction. And so that was an ending for me. And it's important to provide space. You can see on this list for me too, some of these are really raw and difficult endings. Others are more light. All of them are valid and are worth sharing. From there, it's helpful to go into reflection to kind of synthesize what that means. So when I reflect on the endings I experienced with COVID, some of them mark a sense of loss. Other ones I can take with calm and acceptance. Learning is how we take those endings forward. And for me, and it's not always something you ask for. I'm not sure if anybody asked to learn resilience at the rate we did in the last year, but it is a strength now that we have for any beginning we choose. I also learned about who I want and need in my life, and I deepened my values around health. And then finally, each change brings gifts. And these can be relational, they can be related to our power and strengths or knowledge, or they could be gifts of inspiration that we're going to do new and different things because of what we experienced. When I think about the last year, I have a gift of greater consciousness and a deeper appreciation of my family and of nature as I've been stuck inside, but have been able to slow down. And I wonder what gifts you've experienced. After all of this, understanding and naming the ends, giving ourselves space to reflect, we begin looking at those beginnings and notice that not every beginning coaching question is about something new. The first one is about what we leave behind. I don't know about you, but I hope to enter a new beginning without any pretense that I need to know it all or be it all. And I'm going to abandon a sense of control for everything. Please hold me accountable to that, because I am so sure that it is not the way to healthily move forward for me. Then we can start considering broader priorities. It could be around caring for ourselves or finding time away from screens, especially after a year of being so Zoom focused. Being fully present in our moment and no longer multitasking. Last, you can start to pinpoint what you want to begin. As I consider this and my needs, I think about collaboration and communication and just transparency of where I am. I want to live up to the benchmark that Lindsay set for us, right? Of making sure that everybody who I interact with knows very quickly what they're going to get with me, and who they're going to see every time we interact. That was such a powerful lesson and certainly on my beginning list. So this is the process. Instead of seeing an external change and jumping to do a bunch of stuff in reaction to it, take that change as a moment to step back. What ending does this represent? What feelings and reflections can we have about that to identify priorities or processing? And then finally, what beginning do we want to choose now that that change has happened? And this is the conversation that I want to invite you to have in small groups in just a moment. All of the coaching questions I shared with you are available in your handbook on those pages 9 and 10. And we're going to jump into small groups by going to the left-hand column and clicking sessions and noticing that all of the breakout rooms are listed in alphabetical order by last name. This was the best way we could think of to distribute 300 some people evenly. So find where your last name fits and jump into that room. Double check the time. We'll have about 15 minutes once you're there, and give space so that everybody who wants to can share. When we are hitting that 10:35 mark, come back to this main stage and we will apply this learning and the sharing a step further. Thanks so much for being here and ready to support each other, and I'll see y'all in just a little bit. We wondered how to get 300 people into breakout rooms distributed evenly. I think our attempt was our best idea, but for those of you who found yourselves in an empty room and jumped quickly to another one, or just made it work with a partner instead of a whole group, thank you. I hope that this space still gave you exactly what you needed. A moment to process, to affirm and support each other, and to move toward choosing a new beginning. Just getting a note that some groups are still coming in, and so enjoy that chat and that check-in and share your experience there for a moment more. All right. We are going to head in as we are welcoming folks back to the main stage that tech, even a year and then some afterwards, still can throw us. And I don't know about you, but the adrenaline that I felt in April of 2020 of having gotten my grandmother on Zoom no longer exists, right? It is just not the thing that I am proud of anymore. But let's keep going. So we have now gotten a chance to practice this 3-step process for transitioning. Noticing that external change and starting by identifying what that means is ending. Getting into a space of reflection in that neutral zone, and then beginning to consider the beginning we want to choose. And this is, again, where we find our spark. Change can overcome us when we take one look at it and respond by adding, doing more things, new rules, new routines, taking on the responsibility. But we can rise through change when we see it and take a step back. We give ourselves time to process and we choose how we want to respond. And that comes in the form of the new beginnings that you just finished talking about with your groups. And so with new beginnings, my bet is that you need some new rules. And so in the next couple of minutes, what I want to share with you is a space to go back to your drafted rules from the beginning of our session and revise, edit, delete, and add as needed. Those rules that existed that don't actually serve you or even benefit anyone around you, they deserve a big old delete. If they need a little tinkering to make sure that they're set, revise them. Or add new rules that are going to help you rise through change. Maybe that new rule, it has the word no in it somewhere, or pause or reflect in it somewhere. Let's take the next 3 minutes with some music on so that you can get a moment to synthesize what you learned and apply it through this new set of change rules. All right, y'all, could we have asked for better theme music for that? I promise that while we are moving forward, these draft of new change rules are yours to keep and adapt as they serve you. Nothing that you've done today has to be set in stone. You have not made a single mistake. You are playing with this and trying it on together. And thank you for doing that. Now, I have to ask, right? Because I don't get to be in the chat and otherwise. So bring me in. Let's celebrate some things we've left behind. Grab your phone to engage with Menti and share a rule that you revised or deleted. And remember, there are no good or bad rules. There are just ones that serve us or don't. So if you love a rule that gets deleted for someone else, more power to you. But let's share that release a little bit here together. Powerhouse first rule that I'm seeing on my screen. Do not have to be perfect. Perfection doesn't exist anyway. These rules we're leaving behind. Log on at 7:30. That's awesome. In a minute, I'm going to ask you for the favorite rule that you've added. These are the rules that you are going to let go of, that don't have to guide you, that don't have to be the benchmark of if you succeeded or failed when you reflect at the end of the day. Deleting, continue to do everything well. I see some of these rules coming in that we just can't wait to share our new and good ones. So let's move there and take you forward into the rule that you have added or made sure stays at the top of the list that's going to help you rise through change? Share that goodness with us. Put the phone down 5 to 7 p.m. That is amazing. All emotions are valid. As I read through these, I'm just so touched, and I have to say that I wish you nothing but a life forward that honors these rules, that supports you in rising, and that gives you space to adapt them any given day, that they no longer serve you as much as the next one could. Thank you for sharing these. And remember, we're in this together. So if you see a rule that stands out to you, that makes you say, yep, I've got to add that to my list, you grab it. This is a moment to take the goodness of the shared community and expand it through each other. I also see that lots of these rules are coming in through the chat. So with that, I want to take us just one final step forward. Oh, a guitar looks like it's going to fall in the corner of my room. If you hear a bang, that's what it is. I want to take us one step forward, because when you've got a new beginning, you have a new set of rules that are going to support you in thriving. It's time to take that into action. And so in order to do that, the last pages of your handbook show how you can begin to put these rules into action to start thriving every day and through all of the change that I'm sure is still coming our way. And that is through creating an AIM SMART plan. Now, SMART goals may be familiar, but AIM SMART is special because it has two parts. The first is understanding the goal that you have, the rule that you have, and setting a goal to start beginning to live by it, hold yourself accountable or otherwise. When you think about that new rule, consider the absolute minimum you could do, the maximum that would include probably like tattooing that rule on your body, or when you go to the dictionary of that rule, it is your face, right? Your total embodiment, and scratch both of those off, because both don't set us up with the right energy and for success. Find a spot in the middle that you can look at this rule and say, this is how I'm going to begin living by it. And then jump into the SMART planning process. It starts by identifying just the first step. So if your new rule is to drop your cell phone 5 to 7, it might not actually be to drop your cell phone from 5 to 7 p.m. It might be to tell the friends or coworkers or social media that you usually share, hey, this is my plan, so don't expect a quick response. Then maybe later you can drop that phone. Start with your first step so you know that you are empowered in the right journey. Make it measurable so that you know when to dance in the kitchen, or your form of preferred celebration. Dancing in the kitchen is mine. And ensure that the step you take is both reasonable and achievable. It's not going to feel good if you've got a new rule that you want to build into your actions, daily actions, and the only way to take that step is to cancel the rest of the morning. Well, that's probably not going to be the spot we're in. So make sure that it fits both of these things and that you know when you'll be celebrating by. You've got that space to have released the weight that might still be hanging from the last year. A new process that's going to support you in understanding transition, and a set of rules that make sure that you are thriving through those transitions and choosing you in a way that serves you. I just ask that you hold on to this book and commit to these new rules to help you thrive through change, and start putting them in action with that AIM SMART planning process. And the only final thing that I want to share with you as we wrap up, because I will have total FOMO if I don't, is that I am so touched to be here, to have been on your team for the last hour, and I would love to stay on your team forward. So if you have big celebrations and you need somebody to tell, or you get stuck and you need somebody to work through, know that I stand firmly at your side and on your team. It is a true pleasure to be a part of this special community and to have engaged in the work of Rising Through Change with you in the last hour. And with that, all of my gratitude, and I'll pass it back to Cassie.
Thank you so much, Claire. I have, again, so many notes that I am going to be taking with me. A few things that I wrote down. It's been a year. Wow, really felt that. Give yourself permission to release. What a relief, right? And I saw or heard throughout the presentation, we are not robots. And actually, in a very emotional and touching and much needed leadership session in the last year, one of our leadership members said the same thing. And it's just something that I've kept in my mind throughout this whole year. We are not robots, and embrace all of your emotions because they are valid. Change versus transition. I know for me, I always thought, oh, change is really hard. But it's really the transition that takes to the change that's the most difficult part for me. The 3-step process, embracing the ending, reflecting and embracing the gifts that you receive from that. And what I've been really trying to do moving forward is focusing on why this happened for me, and learning all of what that was, and then defining new beginnings. And you have not made any mistakes. So powerful. So thank you so much, Claire, for your time. We are grateful to have you on our team. So thank you.
It is my pleasure. Thanks for everything today.